Welcome back, everyone, to another deep dive. This time we're looking into something pretty chilling. A news story about a grim discovery on a Christmas Eve flight arriving in Maui.
Oh, wow.
A body was found in the wheel well of a plane.
Yeah. That's definitely not the kind of news you want to hear, especially around the holidays.
It really puts a damper on the holiday spirit.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder just how desperate someone would have to be to attempt a journey like that.
It's a tragic situation for sure. And while the specific discovery is shocking, it sadly isn't all that unique stowaways trying to travel in airplane wheel wells. It's something that's been happening for decades. And the odds of survival are incredibly slim.
I can imagine.
Yeah.
When you think about the conditions in those wheel wells,
Yeah.
it's just unpressurized freezing temperatures
Oh, yeah.
and practically zero oxygen at those high altitudes.
Yeah.
The article I read mentioned temperatures can drop to negative 65 degrees Fahrenheit.
Oh, yeah, it's hard to even fathom those kinds of temperatures. Your body would start shutting down almost instantly. You're talking about extreme hypothermia. And then you add in the lack of oxygen at cruising altitude, like 35,000 feet. It's a recipe for disaster. Your body just can't function under those conditions.
So you're dealing with hypothermia and hypoxia at the same time? What exactly happens to the body when it's deprived of oxygen like that?
Hypoxia sets in really quickly at high altitudes. Think of it like your body being starved of the air and needs to survive. You might start feeling dizzy, confused, and eventually you lose consciousness. It's a silent killer in these situations.
This latest incident involved a Boeing 787-10 flying from Chicago to Maui. That's a long flight. This poor individual was likely exposed to those extreme conditions for hours.
Absolutely. And this tragic incident isn't an isolated case. We should look back at the history of stowaway attempts to get a sense of just how widespread this really is. The Federal Aviation Administration, they actually have data on this, going back decades.
The article I shared with you mentioned FAA data that showed 94 flights with 105 stowaways between 1947 and 2014, and tragically 80 of those attempts resulted in death. So survival really is the exception, not the rule.
You got it. The odds are overwhelmingly stacked against anyone who attempts this. But there have been a handful of remarkable survival stories, and those just add another layer of complexity to this issue.
Right. The article I shared highlighted a case from 2014 that's often called the Maui Miracle. A 15-year-old boy actually survived a 5.5-hour flight from San Jose to Maui, hiding in the wheel well of a Hawaiian Airlines Boeing 767.
Yeah, Yahya Abdi's story that really captivated the world. He was incredibly lucky. I mean, his age, the relatively short flight time, and possibly even entering a hypothermic state that slowed down his metabolism. All of those factors likely contributed to his survival.
It's hard to wrap your head around that, surviving that freezing oxygen-deprived journey only to end up facing the legal consequences of stowing away. It makes you wonder, with all the information available online, why do people still attempt this? Is it a lack of awareness, or are there other factors at play?
That's a great question, and it really points to something much deeper: desperation. A lot of these individuals are fleeing really desperate situations, things like poverty, war, or persecution. They might have some vague idea of the dangers, but the desire for a better life for themselves or their families, it outweighs those risks.
I can see that. When you're facing those kinds of dire circumstances, the thought of freezing in a wheel well might seem like a chance worth taking if it means escaping a worse reality.
And that brings us to another tragic reality. Many of these stowaways, they may not fully grasp the severity of what they're facing. They don't truly understand just how hostile that environment really is.
It makes you think about what could be done to raise awareness about the dangers, especially in those regions where stowaway attempts are more common.
Absolutely. We need better awareness campaigns for sure. But we also need to look at addressing the root causes of these desperate journeys. It's not just about border security, it's about tackling poverty, lack of opportunity, and conflict on a larger scale.
This Christmas Eve discovery, it's a harsh reminder of the human cost of desperation and the length people will go to for a chance at a better life. But what about the security measures in place at airports? Could stricter security deter these attempts, or is it more of a Band-Aid solution?
Yeah, it's a tough question. Stricter security might help to deter some people. But for those who are truly desperate, facing extreme hardship, the motivation to escape often outweighs any fear of being caught.
You're right. It seems like addressing those root causes you mentioned, poverty, conflict, lack of opportunity, that would be a more sustainable long-term solution.
Exactly. If we can find ways to create more pathways for legal migration and address those underlying issues that drive people to such desperate measures, then we can potentially save lives.
It's heartbreaking to think about the people who've lost their lives trying to do this, like the man who died in 2007 trying to travel from China to San Francisco in a wheel well.
That case is a really stark reminder of the dangers. An
Yeah.
11-hour flight, he probably succumbed to the extreme conditions long before the plane even landed.
And the article mentioned another more recent fatality in 2014 on a flight from Johannesburg to Dulles International Airport. It just seems like this problem isn't going away anytime soon.
Sadly, you're right. And it really highlights the need for a multifaceted approach. Better security at airports is important, but we also need to focus on those social and economic disparities that push people to risk their lives this way.
It's a lot to think about. This deep dive has been incredibly insightful, but it's also been really heavy.
It has. And I think it's important to acknowledge the human stories that are behind these statistics. Each stowaway attempt represents a life, filled with dream struggles and ultimately a desperate gamble that just didn't pay off.
Yeah, it's a stark reminder that while some of us are celebrating holidays, others are facing these unimaginable hardships. This incident, as tragic as it is, it forces us to look beyond the headlines and think about the complex realities that drive people to make these choices. What is it that makes them take such extreme risks?
We can speculate the desperation is a major factor, but it's got to be more than that. There are deeper societal issues at play, things like systemic inequalities, lack of resources, political instability. All of these things contribute to these acts of desperation.
You're right, it's a much bigger conversation than just looking at the individual cases. It's about recognizing that we're all interconnected, and these issues, they impact all of us.
Absolutely. Awareness is the first step towards understanding. And understanding is crucial if we actually want to find solutions.
This deep dive has been a difficult one to unpack, but it's a story that's important to acknowledge and reflect on.
I agree. It's easy to get caught up in our own lives and forget about the struggles of others. This tragedy is a reminder of those realities.
Thank you for joining us for this deep dive. It's been heavy, but it's important to shed light on these issues and hopefully spark some meaningful conversations.
I couldn't agree more. And hopefully it encourages all of us to think a little bit deeper about the world around us and how we can contribute to a more just and equitable world where these desperate measures are no longer necessary.
Thank you for listening to Justice for the Souls podcast.
Yeah, it's easy to feel overwhelmed by all of this. The scale of these global issues. But it's important to remember that even small actions can make a difference.
Absolutely. It's easy to feel kind of powerless when you're faced with such huge problems, but everyone can contribute in their own way. Supporting organizations that work on alleviating poverty, advocating for refugee rights, even just having these conversations and raising awareness, it all makes a difference.
Right. It reminds us that we're all part of this global community and that these issues are all interconnected. What's happening in one part of the world can have huge ripple effects everywhere.
Exactly. And think about the motivations of the stowaways. They're often looking for a better life, not just for themselves, but for their families and communities too. It shows us that our actions, even at a local level, can have far-reaching consequences.
This deep dive has definitely given us a lot to think about. It's been a journey from those technical aspects of airplane wheel wells all the way to the bigger societal forces that push people to these extreme measures. It really highlights the power of stories like this to make us feel empathy and understanding. Beyond the headlines and the numbers, there are real people with hopes and dreams and families who are affected by these situations.
Well, thank you for helping us navigate this really complex and heartbreaking topic. It's been a tough but important reminder of the challenges we face as a global society.
It's been my pleasure. And hopefully it encourages all of us to think a little deeper about the world around us and how we can make it a more just and compassionate place where these desperate acts are no longer necessary.
Thank you for listening to Justice for the Souls podcast.